Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and today we're going to be looking at Parsha Shemot. Parsha Shemot is the very first Parsha in the book of Exodus, and you can find that right after the book of Genesis. So, Atheist Torah is, I'm an atheist and I'm also a Jew, and this is just my own informal exploration of the Parsha from my perspective as an atheist. So, a Parsha is just a small part of the Torah. The Torah is the 54 Parshas that make up the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Christian, it's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But in Judaism, the Torah is a completely different sort of thing. The Torah is it's a universe of its own, really. It's the complete story of the book. It's the complete story of the 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 origins of the Jewish people as it's told through the narrative and the mythology. So it's a book of origins, and it's also the foundation of Jewish law and Jewish culture in many ways. So it's it's kind of like saying that New York City is just a city. I live in a city, but the city that I live in is like 30,000 people. New York City is, like a universe. That's kind of what the Torah is. So, anyways, so today we're going to be in the book of Shemot. It's the very beginning we're going to be the Parsha Shemot. Sorry, the Parsha Shemot, which is the very beginning of the book of Exodus. It's a really good book. It's really interesting because it's the story about the foundations of the creation of Jews as people. So, I know this is just a story. It's a myth. It didn't really happen this way, but everybody's got a myth. Every culture, every people, have mythologies. I don't think we really have mythologies as atheists. I don't know. Our mythology is that we're not religious. That's kind of our mythology. We're like, if you're lucky and you were born in a society where there wasn't any religion and you just kind of had to figure out things through some other way, then you wouldn't be an atheist because of religion. But most atheists I know were atheists because we were raised in religions. So our, kind of our mythology is that we were born in a religion and then we were born in a religion and then we emerged as beautiful atheists. So that's kind of our mythology. But there's 1,000 creation stories for atheists too. A lot of atheists are just born. They're just born in atheist families and they grow up atheist. And then there's those of us who were raised religious. So that's my cultural narrative, is I was born in a religion and I emerged as an atheist. So very happy as an atheist. But I'm also very happy as a Jew. And it may seem like that's contradictory, but really it's not, because Judaism isn't just about the mythology of the terrible patriarchal God that wants to smite everyone. It's also, I don't know how to put it. It's like, it's a way of marking time. It's a way of marking place. It's an excuse to learn something every week. It's sometimes it's an exploration of morals. It's the foundation of a lot of places to ask questions and to do learning. So for me, it's something I enjoy. Anyway, so today we'll be in the book of Shemot. It's a really great story. It's the beginning of the story of the foundation of the people of Israel, and it's told through the mythical character of Moses, um, if you were somebody who was kind of devout and you sort of believe that Moses was a real person or even based on a real person, I think the timeline is something like maybe, oh, I don't know, I can't remember if it's like in the second millennium BC. So, sometime between 1000 and 2000 BC is kind of the timeline of when the story of Moses is supposed to happen. I mean, there probably wasn't ever really a Moses. It's just like so much in the Torah. I mean, it was redacted, and there was definitely stories. I mean, there's a lot of Egyptian in the Book of Exodus. So the Book of Exodus is actually very very Egyptian. I mean, it's just like the very end of the Book of Genesis is very Egyptian. So it's kind of put in a place. It's put in a place of Egypt, and the idea. I mean, the basic idea is that the people have to get from Egypt to Israel. Even though it's not called Israel yet, but that's kind of like if there was a plot arc. That's kind of where it's going. It's like they started in Egypt and then they go to Israel. And that's so, they didn't know much about the world. They didn't know that there was Africa. I mean, the rest of Africa or Asia or North South America, Antarctica, the Arctic Ocean and the North Pole. And, they didn't know much about the world. This is very, very local. It's sort of like going from Alabama to Mississippi, or going from like Oregon to Washington. It's about as far as they went. It wasn't too far, but they made a whole story out of it, and the story became the foundation of Western monotheism. So what do you know? Anyways, but this story is really it's just about Moses. So this is the very beginning. This is where we kind of set up Moses's life. So Moses is the the Pharaoh decides that he wants to kill all of the Hebrews because the Hebrews are becoming so numerous. And well, first of all, uh, the Pharaoh forgot that this is 400 years into the future of the mythic time of the Torah. So, like 400 years ago, there was Joseph, another mythical character, and Joseph was like this brilliant man who saved Egypt, because he figured out that you should store your grain, which I'm pretty sure the Egyptians already knew how to store their grain. But, anyways, in the story, he's really brilliant and he was in prison, and then he tells the Pharaoh he should store his grain, and the Pharaoh does it, and the famine comes, and he makes Joseph his second in command, and then at the end of the book, Joseph dies, and Jacob dies, and everybody dies, but they're all in Egypt now, and now it's 400 years in the future, and everybody's a slave. So, so here's my first atheist thought about this parsha. The story itself tells us that the arc of time does not necessarily go in a good direction, which I think we can all see right now. You know, um, there's not necessarily progress. I mean, in the ancient world, this is kind of telling you this story that there's not necessarily progress, and or there's different kinds of progress. So, like at the end of the fifth century in the Common Era, Rome collapsed and the entire Western world descended into the Dark Ages. And while the West was in the Dark Ages, Islam was, born in, and then Islam very quickly became um, a culture of arts and sciences and mathematics. And it really eclipsed much of Europe until the Renaissance. And so, this is kind of similar. Like here, there's sort of this high point in the culture of these people, and then they become over time they kind of descend into slavery. And by the time we get into the future, they're all slaves, but apparently they know who they are because they're called Hebrews, and so that's something. And so another atheist lens on these are atheist lenses, and they're Jewish too. I mean, there's not really that much of a difference when you're looking at a lot of the text in terms of what the text is really trying to teach you. So, I mean, I don't know. We can talk about Western philosophy and where do we get our ideas about morality in Western philosophy. I mean, I would probably argue that most of our foundational values that we get in Western philosophy, we get primarily from, our evolutionary heritage. So, here's these ideas that are going to be coming up in this Torah portion about at the very beginning of the port. Well, we've already talked about that. Progress isn't necessarily linear. It doesn't necessarily go from, the past it was more primitive to the future is more organized and more, just and ethical. In this story, it kind of goes backwards. And I mean, I think that, there's no reason that that's not how reality is, because in reality, human civilizations can disintegrate and then they come back together. Whatever you consider to be a moral arc of the civilization can certainly drift this way and that. So here, there's a very strong moral arc right away. The moral arc is that there's this country which is exceedingly powerful and has the capacity to enslave an entire another group of people, 600,000 people, and it has the capacity to enslave them. And the text doesn't ask a lot of questions. Like, it doesn't ask, like, why does the civilization think slavery is right? What are the constitutional rights of these people? What are they? What is their future as slaves? There's no examination of the moral nature of slavery from the perspective of the Egyptians. I mean, the only thing that's understood from the perspective of the Egyptians is that the Jews are slaves. And the fact that they're slaves puts them in the context of lots of other cultures at the time. Let's say that this was written around the time of the Babylonian exile, which is one theory about when the Torah was written. So if the Torah is written around the time of the Babylonian exile, then the elites of the culture were brought in captivity to Babylon. Slavery was definitely in practice all over the Levant. I mean, it had been in practice at least since the rise of the first city-states. And, in past episodes of Atheist Torah study, I mean, I've kind of made the hypothesis that slavery as it was understood in the ancient world probably developed around the time of the rise of city-states. I mean, it was, before then, I mean, we don't really know how civilizations interacted with each other, but we can assume that, there was probably some kinds of captivity that took place, but to have captivity as a form of cultural expression, which is what slavery is something that can't really happen unless you have a civilization, because only with a civilization can you create the kind of social structures that allow you to enforce the mechanism of slavery as a method of coerced labor, as a method of social control, um, and perpetuate it intergenerationally. So, I mean, it could very well be that slavery is actually as old as human civilization. I don't know. I mean, I personally would like to think, this is in my imagination, this is what I'd like to think, is that slavery is part of a patriarchal culture. I really want to believe in my heart that in a matriarchal culture, people wouldn't really engage in slavery. Like, slavery wouldn't be something that cultures that are fundamentally matrilocal and that are matrilineal and that are matriarchal are going to have a really different kind of worldview and a different kind of orientation from a patriarchal society. But of course, I have no evidence of that. I mean, we have no evidence of any of this. I mean, all we can say is that in the narrative, slavery exists, and that slavery right away is foundational to the story. So, right away, slavery is this foundational element in the story, and it actually sets the moral arc for the entire story itself. And one of the things that's really interesting about this book from the previous book is that it's gotten into something that we might consider to be politics. It's stepped into something that is fundamentally political. It's fundamentally about the question of justice, and it's asking justice. It's very, very clever because it starts with a whole set of assumptions that aren't necessarily in the previous book, and they aren't even written, but they appeal to something very deep-seated in human instinct. And so part of the really interesting kind of cleverness to the Torah in the way it's constructed is that the first book makes up this mythical being, this mythical God. And this God is the creator of the universe. It's not like the other gods and the other cultures, like where there's a bunch of different gods and they're not, I don't know, they don't have the kind of psychological dimension that this God has. This God has got a very, very different psychological dimension. I mean, the psychological dimension of this God is much more like, I don't know how all people in all cultures think, but this God is much more similar to how I understand that people think. I mean, people, if you look at little kids, they're very concerned about what's fair and what's just. And when you look back at history, you're always judging it from moment to moment based on what your idea of justice is. So this idea of what's just and what people are entitled to, which is the foundational aspect of, this idea of the rights of, the rights of people as embodied in various constitutions around the world, as embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, these ideas about the rights of people, which are foundational to how we understand democratic societies. Not just democratic societies, though, but also just human meaning, just fundamental human meaning, is contained in the very beginning of this text. So my thought is that people have been thinking the same thing for a long time. I mean, at least 2,300 years, they've had the same ideas about what does freedom mean. Now these ideas can change. They're not always the same. I mean, my own pet theory is that the text was written around 2,300 years ago, and so 2,300 years ago, when the text was written, there was an understanding of what a large colonial power was. People understood what Babylon was. They understood what Rome was. They understood in the past what Assyria had been, what Acadia had been. Carthage. There was an understanding of what it was like to live in a world with these vast colonial powers that, did the kind of horrifying things that the Romans did, because the Romans were just really terrible. They were awful. Believe me, I know a little something about the Romans. I could talk about that some other time, but it's definitely something that I studied as part of my own education, and I could tell you about a lot about the brutality of the Roman culture, about what all the horrible things the Romans did. And, but I mean, I think that it's pretty common knowledge. I mean, maybe it's not, but I mean, I think it is. If you had a classical education, you understand what rotten bastards the Romans were. And the Romans weren't the only people that were like this. I mean, all of these colonial cultures, all of these vast kingdoms around, were almost all the same. I mean, it was very rare to find anyone that was different. I mean, I think that probably the Mycenaeans were a little different. I mean, I think there's some evidence that the Mycenaeans were a little different. I mean, and I think that, I wish that the Greek city states were different, but I don't really think they were. I mean, the Greek city states were actually pretty horrible. If you were a woman, it was a terror, no matter where you lived, except for maybe Mycia. It was really hard being a woman and in any of these places, it was really hard. Anyways, so, oops, where'd my, sorry, just a minute. Okay, there we go. So we have this story that starts off with slavery, and it's rooted in this idea that there's this longing for justice that's like foundational to like the human soul. And I mean, I think that atheists, this is not a narrative that belongs to a religion. This is a universal human condition. Now I could be wrong about that. Maybe I'm like injecting. Maybe I'm imagining some sort of cultural narrative that belongs to my own really broad Western tradition onto like all traditions from the past. I mean, it may be that there wasn't always this longing for justice, this longing for freedom, but I just don't see how there couldn't be. I mean, if you look at anything that's been put in captivity, whether it's a human being or an animal, if you study the past, I mean, the first thing you know about life is that life longs to be free. People want to be free. And so this starts with this really deep rooted. And the question isn't really, I mean, in order to really understand what the Torah is trying to tell you, you have to start by not thinking about what you know instinctively, which is why do people want to be free? But you have to ask yourself, maybe this is where the atheist in me comes in. You have to start by asking yourself, why would somebody want to hold someone else in captivity? I mean, it's such an incredible burden to have another person in captivity. And if you can't see the humanity in another person and understand that there's no ethical reason that you have the right to have any kind of control over another person, then that's really kind of the starting point. I mean, that's where the Torah, I feel like. And so the Torah takes these stories and it starts with these really big things. I mean, I could spend the rest of the hour, I've already spent almost half of this just talking about slavery. And slavery is just one thing in this first parsha. I mean, so I'm going to, if I actually get to the text, I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's so much here in this text. I never do get to the text though. Sometimes I don't even read any of the text because I just spend so much time talking. But the Torah takes this and it flips it upside down so that you're thinking about, you're not thinking about the oppressor or the colonizer. You're thinking about, and you're not thinking about the people as victims either. You're thinking about that instinct for freedom. That's what you're really thinking about when you read the Torah here. And this desire for freedom, this desire for liberation, this desire for self-actualization is kind of like, that's the deep current that this entire book travels through. I mean, if there's anything in here that's God, that's it. It's and that so mimics evolution. I mean, when you look at animals don't make slaves out of each other. I mean, animals do terrible things to each other. They eat one another. Sometimes they've been designed by evolution to eat each other. Sometimes they do other really horrible things. Like, here we're gonna get to it later, or well, probably maybe we'll get to it. But there's another story here in the parsha. One of these stories, which is, it's a great storytelling device. It's the story of how the Pharaoh is afraid that the Pharaoh decides that all of the firstborn male children of the Hebrew people have to be killed, because he's afraid of them, that they'll rise up and that they'll overcome him and they'll overcome his community. So, and that's not that different. I mean, there's actually this is about the same. I mean, I can actually find an analogy in this in nature, where I mean there are animals, gorillas for one, that will sometimes kill all of the babies. If a gorilla takes over a grouping of other female gorillas who previously had another, like, alpha gorilla or whatever you call it, who was the main gorilla, of the group, whatever you call them, then it's the gorilla will kill all of the other babies that have been born to the previous male, as a way to preserve his. I mean, what they think is that he does it as a way to preserve his own, genetic line, I guess. I don't know what other animals do it. I've heard that bears will do this sometimes. Anyways, it's something that mammals do, and it's bloody awful. And it's like, it doesn't speak very well for us. It certainly doesn't, back up my claim that our morals are based on our evolution. But it does, it does actually track with a story here. There's a story here, right away, where the Pharaoh does this, and it's kind of similar. I mean, it's kind of similar, and I mean, this story is done again. It's the same story that's done again in the Christian Bible, and so it's probably a really old story. This isn't the first time somebody's thought of this plot device. But it's actually a plot device that mimics something true about nature. So, and, I mean, another one of the things that the Torah does really good, and, I mean, I have to say as an atheist that there's some wisdom to this. I mean, the Torah doesn't really claim that people are fundamentally just, or that they instinctively know how to do good. Now, as an atheist, I definitely contest that. I mean, I think that the only place where we've ever gotten our morality is from, we've never gotten morality or our moral and ethical values from anyone other than ourselves. I mean, and I don't think that we can really say that much about what's fundamentally moral. I mean, I think that we know that there's certain things that you can do that are definitely much more moral, and there's things that we've learned from, from modernity that really help us be moral if we can do it. I mean, we've learned that, if everyone has, housing, if everyone has access to education, if people have access to meaningful work, if they have some kind of security, they're much more likely to be moral, So when people have the things that they need, and when the policy of the society is to try to ensure that everyone has what they need, it's much easier for people to be ethical and to be moral. And when people live in environments of want and lack, and where there's constant need, and where People are not permitted education or rights or equal opportunity. In those kind of environments, there's going to be behavior that's more reflective of that lack of access, that lack of want. And I mean, that the well, you know what I mean. Anyways, so I mean, and that's a good foundation for an ethical, analysis. I mean, of what where morals really come from. I mean, I don't think that. I mean, the Torah goes too far. And just like most religion goes too far because it says that there's a God or that people are sinful or that the nature of the universe is somehow there's something wrong with the universe. And, when it's really clear there's nothing wrong with the universe. I mean, the universe is just the universe. There's nothing wrong or right about it. It doesn't have any moral position. I mean, um, but we do have the instinct to survive and to reproduce and to perpetuate life. That's kind of built into us as a species, and we're lucky. We're really lucky. I mean, we've won the lottery for existence. So we're the ultimate existentialists. We exist because we live in a place in the universe where all of the conditions came together just right to make the world what it is, and then all of the conditions came together even more right to create life, and then life, once it was created, had a chance to expand in these crazy ways that eventually led to us. But underneath all of that is just the raw physics of the long evolutionary arc of life on Earth, and we have all of that built into us too. So I mean, each one of us is a natural born killer. We're a predator. We're also designed to take care of our young. I mean, we have all of the evolutionary instincts that nature has given us, plus the added capacity for cruelty that nature doesn't even generally create in most animals. I mean, animals can be very cruel, but nothing like us. I mean, we're the ultimate in terms of cruelty. So there's nothing about us, like, even from an atheist perspective, I wouldn't say that there's anything inherently good about human beings, but I wouldn't say that we're inherently bad either. And but I don't think that we get our sense of justice or ethics or anything like that from a god. There's no god to give that to us. I mean, part of what being an atheist means is that ultimately you can't find that in a god. Now you can find it in a text about a god that people made up in order to have some kind of ethical framework for their civilization. And I think that's ultimately what the monotheistic God is. I mean, the monotheistic God is a placeholder for restraint on the worst instincts and the worst impulses of a civilization. And it tries to tell the story, not just the story of the individuals and their. I mean, here it's one of the. It's not exactly a failing. It's just, when the literature was written, it was just written the way that it was. But from my perspective, one of the shortcomings of the Torah is that it doesn't tell enough about the individual longing for justice that, like, individual people have. It kind of tells the story collectively through one person, which is a pretty common narrative at the time. I mean, I think that the redactors of the Torah in some ways were trying to, here by creating Moses, they were trying to kind of have the hero's journey. I mean, the hero's journey was a known narrative device in the ancient world. I mean, it was part of storytelling, and it was in the written literature. And I think that, Exodus, especially Exodus, is really the hero's journey. I mean, it's trying to tell the story of the hero's journey, in in a very specifically kind of Jewish way. I mean, there's things about the character here that are just so telling and they're so insightful. So, a few things that I just want to highlight in this first book of in this first parsha from the book of Exodus, Shemot, is about the character and the hero's journey that the character is telling. So he's born as an ordinary person, the child of slaves. His mother tries to save him from being killed, like all the other babies were doing, by sticking him in the river in a basket. He gets discovered by one of the um, one of the maid servants of the Pharaoh's household. She decides she wants to adopt him as a child, and then she hires his mother. She doesn't know that that's his mother, but she hires his mother to be the maid servant for the child. So basically, Moses grows up with his mother, but they don't really name who Moses is. I mean, they don't name the mother. They don't really talk about like the background. So you have this hero right away, this person who's going to be like the hero of the story, but is just a common person, like doesn't have any lineage. And as an atheist, I really appreciate that because it's like if you're going to make up a story with the mythology, then why not just pick some random person? There's this random person and here's his random story. I mean, part of the story, it's not that it's a great story, but it's not a bad story either. I mean, it's pretty clever. I mean, as Jews, we read the same story over and over again, so we really get to know it, and you get to know all kinds of little idiosyncratic things about the story. So, I'm not saying that I mean, there's a thousand good stories out there of heroes, and this is just one, but it's not bad. So, anyways, he grows up with privilege, but he knows that he's from a different society, a society of slaves. He knows that that's where he's from, and he knows that those are his people. So he grows up, but he grows up with privilege, and so he's around people with privilege. And so here we're talking about class too, which I'm not even gonna get to just the stuff I want to talk to you in this parsha because there's so much in it. But I don't even know if I'll get to the burning bush. That's really good. Maybe I'll have to do that another year. Anyway, so he grows up in this society with class distinctions, and he's moving back and forth. In his mind, he is both an Egyptian with high class privilege, and he's also a Hebrew slave because he knows that those are the people that he came from. So he has this mixed identity, that's really interesting. I mean, it's really interesting because it's showing how class has been an issue for so long in human civilization. It's terrible. This is why there was an entire communist revolution in the 20th century. I mean, and honestly, even though you might say, well, communism is dead, you know, Russia fell, communism isn't really a thing. But I mean, the communists still have power in a lot of countries, most notably in China. And even though communism isn't in fashion the way that it was in the 19th century and in the 20th century, because, there were so many failings of communism. But it's still, this idea about class and how, I mean, what did you have before communism? Before communism, you've basically had like 60 or 70 century, no more than that, 600 or no more than that, like 700 or 800 centuries of class. I mean, the class system as it's existed in Western civilization has had a long, long time to develop. And every country on earth, every country has adopted these class systems which create vast differences in between the haves and the have-nots, and almost every one of these civilizations seems to favor the idea of having like an elite class that is over and above everyone else in the society. That seems to be really uniform, like throughout not just Western, but also Eastern civilizations. It seems to be very common to create these social hierarchies that are just completely insane. I mean, when you think about it, they're just completely insane. I mean, how can you ever compete with a lineage of pharaohs or a lineage of billionaires or a lineage of kings or a lineage of landed gentry? I mean, how can you have any kind of really meaningful social progress and any real advancement in the civilization when you have these vast, vast differences in what people have access to and what their rights are? So here you have Moses, who's this character who's going back and forth in his mind between these two realities. And of course, there's lots of other people who this is a true story because there really are not the story of Moses is true, but this is a true story of people. I mean, there are people who move in between classes, for whatever reason. Um, One way to do it is through marriage. You could marry in. You might also be adopted or born. That's the most common way that you get into a privileged class is that you're just born into it. And then sometimes you might get into it through your merits. And that's kind of the truth even today. I mean, in spite of the mythologies that people have about the United States and about capitalism and anybody can rise up, I mean, it doesn't generally work that way. I mean, generally the way that it works in this country, I mean, occasionally it does. Occasionally you have somebody like an Andrew Carnegie, who moves. But even then, they're still kind of moving within the class system. So it's like, they might come from a lower class, but they're manipulating the levers of the class system to their own benefit. They're not really like abolishing the class system. And that's kind of what the communists wanted to do. The communists kind of wanted to abolish the class system, which, I mean, I kind of feel like there's a little bit of communism here in the very beginning of the Torah because right away it's deeply aware of class and class privilege. I mean, Moses is incredibly troubled by this. He has an identity. Now, is his identity though with the people he was born to because they're underprivileged, or is his affinity to those people just an affinity that he has to them because of who they were? So is it because they were the underdogs, because they were the people that were oppressed, that he had an affinity with them, or was it just because that's where he was born? He was born to those people. So if he had been born to those people and they were very privileged, would he have still had the same kind of class awareness that he has in the context in which he's in? So I don't know. I mean, I think that, but I think that that's really foundational to the story. So in this story, regardless of whether it's because they're Hebrews, because they're Jews, or if it's because they're oppressed, I mean, in this case, they're both, but whichever one it is, he feels a strong affinity to them. And so as we move on in the story, there's one day when he grows up around the Pharaoh and he grows up in the court and he has a lot of privilege. And one day while he's wandering around out in Egypt and around the other Egyptians and the Hebrew slaves, he sees some Egyptian treating some Hebrew people very harshly, and he tries to stop him. And in the process of stopping him, he kills a fellow Egyptian. So this is, it sounds like it's a crime of passion. Like, he doesn't start intending to kill an Egyptian, although maybe he does. I mean, maybe he really does want to liberate his people, and this is like his revolutionary act of violence. I don't know. I mean, that could be what it is. It seems to say that. I mean, it really does kind of seem to say that. But it kind of stains the story from the beginning with blood. So just like in Genesis, I mean, very early in the text, there's already murder and there's blood. And here there's murder, like very early in the text, there's a murder. And the murderer is the main character. So he's been traumatized by the violence that he sees in the community that he's observing, but he's also been traumatized himself by his own act of violence. And so he loses his privilege because he's committed an act of murder against a fellow Egyptian. And he sort of claimed his own identity too. But, he has the training and the sophistication and the background. He understands the language of the elites, but he's also, through his act of revolutionary violence, he's become he's lost his status within the elites. But as we'll see later in the story, he's still an elite. I mean, he's been trained within an elite culture, and he has kind of an elite narrative. So he continues to carry the narrative of the upper class and of the kind of controlling class. But he's going to be creating his own government, his own nation, his own storyline. Not necessarily so much for himself, but he's like building a country and the mythology. So, I mean, what do I think about this as an atheist? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't have that much to do with atheism or with religion, honestly. I mean, it eventually becomes it becomes a religious text very quickly, because, but what it's doing here in the first place is it's putting in all of these tools that are just normal tools of, culture, of civilization building, and of how civilizations. Now, it could have entered the story of how a civilization is constructed at any point. I mean, there's a lot of other narratives that you could have used in this text to tell a similar kind of story. But here, this is the story that we get. This is the one that we got passed down over time. And it's a good story. I mean, it's been really parsed, I think, it's like, like a really good sculpture. It's kind of like a lot of parts are kind of taken, a lot of pieces of stone are taken away to kind of make the, to make the form that we're trying to reveal here. And so, there's a lot of other ways that the text could have gone to try to tell the story. But so far there isn't really any God here. And that's why I say, I mean, it's not really, like, we're not really quite getting into atheist territory yet. I mean, here it's like, it's just about civilizations and like the problems of civilizations. Now, before this parsha is over with, we get into the problematic God right away. But it's not, so here I do want to talk about the burning bush for just a minute. Everybody knows the burning bush. It's like, it's coming up pretty soon. But since I'm almost at the end of time here, I want to make sure I get to it, because there's something in the language of the text that is so interesting. So in the text, if you look at the Hebrew, when Moses encounters the murder, I'm just jumping ahead to this because everybody already knows the story. So in the text, so like I said, Moses, He's killed the Egyptian. He's gone out into the wilderness. He's working out in the wilderness now as a shepherd. So he's gone from like an elite to like an ordinary person. He still has to make a living. So he's hanging out with sheep all day. And he meets I can't remember. He meets some. He helps out some women, and he ends up marrying them. He asks the Yitro, for his permission to marry their daughter, and so he marries one of his daughters, and who's also lives out in the wilderness and is a shepherd. Um, and this is a long time. We're talking like 20 years. He's out in the wilderness for a long time. Um, and while he's out there, one day he sees the burning bush. It's like it's a bush and it's not being consumed by flame. Like who knows what it is? Maybe it's an oil well that's burning. It doesn't matter. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. And here's where we get to start to put on our atheist hats. And kind of like look at this and deconstruct the text from an atheist perspective. But I mean, I will say this though about the text, about the Hebrew, and it's really interesting because in the text, when Moses is having his hallucinations or when he's encountering the burning bush and he doesn't really know exactly what he's seeing, uh, he hears these voices in his head, and the voices tell him to take off his sandals and fall down on the ground because he's on holy ground. And here he is. This is like the God of uh, of Jacob and the God of Isaac, and all those people, from before. And so he's getting to meet the God. It's like a family reunion. He's going back in time and he's hearing about all the culture and the good times from the old country and what things were like back then, and it's the God, and he's rediscovering the God. So he's rediscovering the God. But to me, the really interesting thing, the part that I think even as an atheist is really interesting, is that in the story, the God says, "I am, I am that which is becoming." It kind of like that, like sometimes it's like it goes like I am who am, or I am that which will be. I prefer to think of it as I am that which will be is becoming. Okay, so this is probably the last thing I'll really have time to get to in today's Atheist Torah study. But so what's really interesting about this to me is because it gets into this idea of, is the God of Western monotheism, is it a Calvinist God, a God who is like a predeterministic God? Is this a predeterministic God who understands everything about time and space and the unfolding of the universe? So is this God a God that's in control of everything in the universe and kind of knows like what's going to happen and like knows your innermost thoughts and like who your descendants or anybody's descendants are going to be like 1,000 generations from now, and understands how what's going to happen at the end of time? Or is this a God who like doesn't really know that because the universe is unfolding? So the God is like, I am that which is becoming. And so to me, what's really interesting about that from this perspective of an atheist, I'm going to try to get to this in about 4 minutes if I can, is that we don't really quite understand exactly what the nature of time is. I mean, we think we know that time exists. I mean, when we talk about the universe, we talk about space-time. And that's because we know that it's a way to explain. I mean, clearly the universe is changing. As we observe the universe, it changes. And so we have this idea of space-time, and time is a really useful, I mean, you can't really explain the universe without time. But the thing is that what is time? I mean, time isn't anything. There's not a time. There's no time. It's just, it's kind of like mathematics. I mean, it's this thing that we've put in place so that we can understand change, but we don't really understand what time is. I mean, I have a pet theory. Now, this is going off the ranch, okay? I'm totally going off the ranch here. This is just me talking. This isn't even, I'm not speaking for other atheists. But I have a theory that there really isn't any such thing. There isn't really time. I have a theory that like everything is in the same moment. Like there's only the moment. That's the only thing that exists. Anything you think about the past is a projection. It's something that you've constructed in your head. It doesn't mean that it didn't exist in the past, but it doesn't exist anymore because there's nothing, it doesn't exist. And there's no future either because the future doesn't exist. The future is something that may unfold unless there's a quantum vacuum somewhere that opens up and just, rips apart the fabric of the universe right away. Otherwise, probably the probabilistic nature of the universe is something that we can explain and understand, and we sort of understand where it's going. We don't have all of the answers, but we have a pretty good sense of what the possibilities are. But none of this really, I mean, it involves time, but time isn't real. It's everything is right now. It's happening right now. This is the only time. There's no time. And so there's something fundamental about the story. Like Moses is having this experience with this deity. And, I mean, even though, the deity talks to him and the deity burns. So Moses can see the deity. But when Moses wants to know what the deity is, all the deity can say is, I am that which is becoming. And so to me, that's really interesting because it actually says something really true about the world. Like, we don't really, who could have predicted that human beings would have popped out of the world, 10,000 years ago or 2 million years ago, and that out of all the species that ever existed on Earth, somehow some weird random thing would happen that would create these creatures that have consciousness that's, enough consciousness that we can create language and convey our stories. So that's really interesting to me. That's we have, and who knows what'll happen to us next. We might just destroy ourselves and wipe out our evolutionary heritage. We have no idea what's next, but we do know that it's up to us. I mean, whatever that means, it's up to us collectively. Pretty much it's up to us to decide what happens next. So anyways, so that's Atheist Torah Study. Again, my name is Emma. You can find me on YouTube and TikTok. I've also got a blog. You can find Atheist Torah Study on medium.com. Just look for the words Atheist Torah Study. And I have this Parsha transcribed on Medium. So anyways, thanks a lot for joining me. And I'll see you next week for another episode of Atheist Torah Study. Thanks so much and have a great night.